Can higher education be saved? That's a provocative title for a provocative subject. And any casual observer of the higher education landscape knows that the institution is besieged by a myriad of problems, and many of them of their own doing. Escalating costs, loss of public trust in the value of a college degree, free speech issues, politicization of the campuses. You get the picture. Today, we're going to have a moderated discussion around that question, and we have three distinguished panelists to join us. Our first panelist is C. Philip Byers. He's president of the Challenge Foundation Properties, and the executive director of the Education Freedom Alliance, two organizations that have been instrumental in providing assistance to a growing number of charter schools in North Carolina. Mr. Byers also serves on the UNC Board of Governors, and he previously served for several decades as a sheriff in Rutherford County, and also a member, an executive director and a former board member of the Thomas Jefferson Community Education Foundation. Robert Shibley is founder and executive director of FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And FIRE defends the First Amendment rights of students and faculty members across America. And anyone who's observed the craziness on campuses over the last 15 years knows the great impact that FIRE has had. And lastly, I also wanted to welcome Jenna Robinson. Jenna will be the moderator for today's discussion. She's the president of the Martin Center for Academic Renewal here in Raleigh, and Jenna holds a PhD degree in political science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her work in higher education has appeared in Investors Business Daily, American Thinker, Human Events, and the Raleigh News and Observer, along with other papers. Jenna has taught classes in American politics at UNC Chapel Hill and the Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, as well as testified before the United States Congress. So Jenna, will you start us off and lay out the landscape for today's discussion?
When I first accepted moderating this panel, I didn't realize that we were charged with saving all of higher education. I didn't realize that was the title. But fortunately, all three of us do work in higher education reform, and so we all are working to that goal of saving higher education, reforming higher education, improving higher education. And so I want to start by letting Phil and Robert tell you, about their work in reforming higher education. So Phil, I'll start with you. Tell me about your work on the UNC Board of Governors.
Thank you so very much. A couple disclaimers. We've had 4 Board of Governors members here the past 2 days, and that is a good sign. David Powers, being one, is with us here. If you have questions or complaints, and Steve, are you? Steve Long, okay, so we've had 5. So any complaints or any concerns, please question them instead of me, because I have the lowest IQ on the Board of Governors. They just keep me around for comic relief, and because they don't know if I still carry a gun or not. And so I've always got them there. My part of education is I'm a product of the UNC system and the traditional public system. And in my real life, we have 21 charter schools across the United States, and we do education reform. All the ugly, if you read the Charlotte Observer, the News and Observer any day, you'll see our names. They write about us daily. But we do that on the K-12 level because as sheriff, I saw 3 things that everyone I arrested had in common. They had less than a high school education. This was 85 to 90%, less than a high school education, and they were unemployed, and their job skills were pretty inadequate. So I realized that if we were going to correct the economy, we were going to improve the area that I lived in, we had to have a better education system. So then I felt guilty because it took me 7 years to graduate from Appalachian State, and then 3 years to graduate from Western Carolina Graduate School. That's not true. It wasn't the university's fault. It was my fault. I fell in love with Boone and Cullowhee and didn't ever want to leave. So this is a guilt thing for me. I'm just trying to pay back because I stayed 10 years in college. But all jokes aside, I'm the crazy one, both on the Board of Governors and on this panel. But at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is improve the quality of life of people in this state through education.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Robert Shibley, and I'm the Executive Director of Fire. As you folks learned from the introduction, if you haven't heard of us, we defend First Amendment rights as well as due process rights on college and university campuses across the country. We were founded in 1999. When I started there, we had 6 other employees, and now we've got about 50. And that's actually the opposite direction of where we'd like to go. We would like to put ourselves out of business. Unfortunately, we are not doing a great job with that, as we have seen, although the challenges to free speech on campus are changing. They are also, not really any less serious. When we really first started, most of the attacks on free speech were coming from administrators who would use rules like speech codes in order to tell people that they couldn't, say, for instance, be against women in the military or gay marriage. Now, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more of people coming out of that K through 12 system, which is a real problem. Students coming out of there who think that they should be protected from anything that offends them, that they think that this is not a place, and they'll actually go to administrators whose numbers have grown astronomically and ask for people to be silenced, for them to be protected against opinions. And so now we're fighting a cultural battle on that as well. And that's a tough one because Fire is a nonpartisan organization, and we don't have a position on these cultural things. But when you have a culture war issue, as we do now, people will say they line up for and against things. And unfortunately, the left, for the most part, is as students, is lining up against free speech. And so that's something we're going to have to contend with in the coming years.
Thanks, Robert. So, Phil, I don't want you to feel bad. I spent 13 years at NC State and UNC Chapel Hill. So your years, that's nothing. I got you beat. And I guess I'm still working with the colleges and universities, trying to reform them now. But, maybe
I feel better.
there, you feel better. So, Robert, you talked a little bit about free speech just now, and Fire actually played a role in North Carolina's recent turnaround on free speech, and I'm not sure if everyone has heard that North Carolina has actually made a huge change on free speech, and I'd like you to tell us about that because it's some of the good news in higher education.
It really is. I'm happy to say that since I moved here, North Carolina has become number 1 in the nation on free speech on public college campuses. Fire rates university campuses on a red, yellow, green light system, and North Carolina has more percentage-wise green light schools than any other state in the nation, so we should be proud of that. And I think that's a testament to a lot of the work that people here in North Carolina have done, and frankly, I think the origin of that, the origin of why North Carolina now leads the nation in at least guarantees of free speech on campus is because early on, in probably 2005, 2006, Fire and what was then the Pope Center and is now the Martin Center joined together. We got a call from the Pope Center and they said, hey, we'd like you to rate all of the schools in North Carolina. We want you to pay special attention to our state. And we did. And we've been working together on that periodically ever since. And I think because of that, that we got sort of an early start. I think North Carolina is now leading. I think that's why we're leading the nation in green light schools. In fact, even Duke is a green light where I went. Wake Forest and Davidson, not so great. But overall, North Carolina, if you want to be free to speak your opinion on campus, North Carolina is the best state in the nation in which you can do that. And so I think Fire and the Martin Center have had a huge impact. And of course, the legislature here is aware of that. We also have, if you're accused of a campus crime, and North Carolina was the first state to give you the right to counsel. So you can actually have an attorney. A lot of people don't realize that campus crimes aren't plagiarism now. People are being tried for sexual assault, for grand theft, you name it. And students are often, you're a 19-year-old, you've been accused of something, you may or may not have done it, you don't know what you're doing. And here in North Carolina, we've recognized that, let's give these folks some help so we can actually have a fair process instead of some sort of weird inquisition. So North Carolina's really been a great leader on that.
Thanks, Robert. And before we turn to the many problems that Bob mentioned, I want to talk about one more bright spot in North Carolina. We are very lucky to be here in North Carolina. We've had a lot of success in reforming the system here. And I want to turn to Phil and ask about one of those successes. So, Phil, North Carolina has kept tuition much lower than other states. Our General Assembly funds higher education more on a per pupil basis than almost every other state, more than, I think it's, except 4 others. There are 4 of them that are ahead of us. But we still hear complaints that college is too expensive. Or on the other side, we hear that UNC has been cut to the bone. What can be done, and what does the board do to address these 2 concerns?
I grew up in Rutherford County, and when you say cut to the bone there, that means you've got more bills than you've got money. And that's not the case on any of our universities. So let's say that first. But as far as the legislature, I think they do a great job. I think they appropriate a great amount of funding. Now, yes, we've built a huge university system with a lot of old buildings, a lot of new buildings too, but there's a lot of old ones. So they have to be maintained. We built it, so we have to maintain it, and that's the structure of it. So it takes money, but I think the legislature does their part. I think the Board of Governors this year is doing its part by saying no tuition increases and a maximum of 3% in student fees. And so that gives a little bit for the universities, if they have special needs, that they can deal with the 3%, but no increase in tuition. So yes, we may be at the top, but it's our job as Board of Governors to try to reduce those costs, because it's very important to me that the guy driving a truck down Interstate 40 today, or the guy working in the lumber mill, be able to afford to send their kids to UNC just like other people. So we've got to keep those costs down.
Thank you, Phil. So now I'd like to move on to probably a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts that we're concerned about, and that is politicization on campus. I think we'd all like to see a less lopsided academia, politically speaking. I'm sure you've seen the statistics that in some departments there is 1 Republican for 19 Democrats. And of course, it's worse in the humanities and social sciences than in the STEM fields. And those are the fields, the humanities and social sciences are the fields in which it matters most, because those are the fields in which important debates occur and should occur. So we all recognize, here in this room at least, that this is a problem. We'd like to see more viewpoint diversity on campus. But at the same time, we don't want to trample on the free speech rights of faculty or students. And at least I would not like to see some kind of affirmative action for conservatives, because I think that that's the wrong way to address the problem. So I'll start with you, Robert. Do you see any way forward on this?
That's a tough question. If I had an answer to that, I would, hopefully I would be done with my job. The politicization of the university is a really serious problem, because it creates the environment under which all of these other abuses can happen. It's become very apparent that when you have a situation that lends itself to groupthink, when you have everybody thinking the same thing, it tends to be a more extreme grouping. And it tends to be a grouping that is less tolerant of opinions that go outside of that. I mean, it's really, in some ways, not very different from being part of a mob. When all the mob is going in one direction, there's very few people who are going in a different direction. And not only that, it doesn't seem like you would want that to be happening. And so I think, while universities, I think some people speculate that this was some kind of plan, political plan, and obviously there are people who I think are purposely trying to politicize the university. I think it's mostly we sort of got here through somewhat natural processes. The problem is that now that we are here, now that we're at a place where we are so lopsided, how do we get out of that without violating the very principles, like Jenna was saying, that we're asking people to apply? I think what needs to happen, and I think I'm starting to see a little bit of an inkling with this with faculty members, but it's certainly nowhere near a majority of faculty members, is because the sort of ideological policing has gotten so specific and so narrow. Even these are faculty members, even ones who are generally on the left. They have a lot of different opinions, but it's getting to the point where if your left opinion is too different from somebody else's left opinion, now you're the bad guy too. And I think that's starting to open some eyes there. What needs to happen is an attitude shift, and these can happen quickly and they can happen slowly. I hope it will happen more quickly with the faculty members who are in charge of hiring and figuring out who's doing good scholarship here, to actually start to say, okay, this has gotten a little too far. We need to start seeking out a few people who can maybe weigh it in the other direction. That's a tough question. I mean, people don't like being challenged on their opinions. But I think that's the only way to do it without some sort of affirmative action program or other kind of really intrusive ideological policing of what's going on. I don't think it's better to do that. Maybe morally speaking, it would be better to do that, through the law in a clear and, open way, rather than the way it's done now, which is kind of a wink and a nod. He's not really our kind of person thing. But I think either way, it's certainly not conducive to a university experience.
Thanks, Robert. And I'm going to weigh in on this one a little bit too, because how many of you saw the headline yesterday in the News and Observer that UNC Chapel Hill has adopted the Chicago Principles on Free Speech? So that was a wonderful piece of news. And I have a little bit of inside information on that. That movement was actually started by a faculty member there who is a member of a group called Heterodox Academy. And this is a faculty membership organization that wants pluralism on campus, that wants diversity of opinions on campus. And at UNC Chapel Hill right now, there are only 5 professors who are members, but they're the ones who went to the faculty senate and said, this is important. We need to recognize that diversity of opinion, that freedom of inquiry, and that the pursuit of truth is what's important here on campus. And that's how the Chicago Principles got adopted at UNC Chapel Hill. And so I think that experience shows that a few people who really care about the issue, as faculty members especially, can make a big difference.
Jenna, can you just highlight a couple of those so people know more what we're talking about as far as the principles themselves?
Right. So the Chicago Principles. Okay. Sorry. Okay. We'll try to speak up a little bit more. So the Chicago Principles on Free Speech started at the University of Chicago, and it was a basic statement saying that the university respects free speech on campus and that the university is not going to do things to protect people's feelings, to establish that one particular kind of opinion is the opinion of the campus, but that the campus is really devoted to freedom of inquiry, research, and the pursuit of truth. And that's what the Chicago Principles were designed to do. And now a number of universities have adopted those. Robert, do you know how many?
I think it's somewhere north of 35 at this point, whether it be faculty bodies or the university itself, I think including the whole University of Wisconsin system. So it is spreading, and these only started in 2015. They're not new principles really, but this particular sort of elucidation of the principles is new, and I think it's important that it came from a faculty committee at Chicago as opposed to being imposed from outside.
Thank you. So now I want to turn to Phil on the same question. Do you think there's anything that the UNC Board of Governors can do to foster viewpoint diversity on campus?
I do. And first thing, I see a lot of college-age young men and women here today. We have to encourage you. so often conservatives and conservative thinkers go into the free market, they go into the business world. We have to encourage you to go into the field of higher education, because our bullpen is not filled with great relievers if you study baseball. We don't, when a position's open at a university, many times there's not a conservative thing. Not that you're looking solely about that, but most people that hang around the universities are liberals. So we've got to build a bullpen that we can call on the young men and young women in this room to take those positions. There's other things with the diversity, and things are happening that you don't read about in the paper unless it's a little ugly editorial in the back. But like speakers bureaus, I have friends who fund speakers to come into the universities in North Carolina. I think this week we had Tucker Carlson. We've had the governor of Tennessee, both at Chapel Hill recently. I was part of having John Allison at UNC Pembroke recently. Those of you that know John from BB&T days and from Cato days. And Kimberly Stossel was there. And I didn't, no protests, none of the problems. What I saw was several hundred students there asking the right questions, and maybe they didn't agree, but it was respectful. And John and I went out to dinner with 24, 25 students and had the best conversation, and that's what we have to keep doing. We have to bring diversity. It has to be from the students up, because we can go talk about it, but until the students take part, look at the SGA, and I'm getting off key a little bit. You hit me or somebody throws something at me. We have students complain. We heard someone last night say, well, I have a child in school that they can't write or say what they want because they'll make a bad grade. We have to fix that problem. That's wrong. That's bad, and we have to be able to stand up to that type of behavior, and we have to have people that will step up. SGA, every campus, student government, and they have a budget, and they get to determine where the money goes for that budget for programs or for different clubs to be part of that campus. And if you look at the SGA, conservatives won't run. I get students call all the time and they complain about the SGA on their campus, and I say, well, how about running for office? Let's fix that. And it's hard, I understand that, but we have to go from the students up if we're going to fix this problem. If there's enough demand, I promise you, you'll get people's attention. You'll get chancellors and administrators' attention if there's enough demand.
Thank you. I think, Robert, you've had experience with speakers on campus. Is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah, Fire recently started doing, scientifically, we started partnering with YouGov to do polls of student attitudes on free speech. And what he was mentioning about outside speakers and how important they can be, part of the problem with the university environment, it's part of the fun. At Duke, we used to call it Gothic Wonderland, but I think a lot of places they call it sort of the bubble. You have this bubble effect, and it's, there's a lot of peer pressure, and nowadays, in a way that I don't think, I know I sound like, but nowadays there's a lot more pressure to sort of conform with all of your fellow students' opinions. But there's always people who would like to hear something different, and breaking this sort of hermetic seal over these campuses is important, and that's why it's important that outside speakers be allowed to come on campus, even if they are controversial or upsetting. What I wanted to get to was one of the things we found in our poll of like 1,200 college students is that 64% of them said that they had changed an attitude or opinion about an issue after listening to a guest speaker. And what really struck me about that is I'm not sure that I've had that experience that frequently, and I am often a guest speaker places, so I'm surprised how often students are willing to say, you know what, I have actually changed my opinion after one guest speaker. That's how important it can be to just break that seal just a little bit and let a little bit of sunshine come in.
Thanks, Robert. So this issue ties into the issue of institutional neutrality. And this is one area where North Carolina's new law didn't go as far as some reformers suggested. So our public institutions are still free to take official political positions. For example, they could join the BDS movement against boycotting Israel if they wanted to. They're still free to do that legally. Does Fire have a position on institutional neutrality?
We are institutionally neutral on that, and I'm not actually kidding. Generally speaking, and excuse me, the University of Chicago is actually famous for a statement, an older statement, decades old, about institutional neutrality, and so it's not really a surprise that they followed up with the Chicago statement in 2015. But this has been a big debate. The Goldwater Institute has. They have a model bill out there that would, if you follow the exact language of the model code, it would require colleges and universities to stay institutionally neutral on basically all political issues. There's probably some room for interpretation. That we think is probably too high a lift for most universities in today's political environment. I actually, and this isn't really a Fire position, but I think most of us at Fire would probably agree that if colleges had never gotten in the position where people were asking them to take political positions and being willing to, if they had, like the University of Chicago did, it said, you know what, we understand that, for instance, apartheid, which was a big deal, obviously, they said, we understand that a lot of people have huge objections to that, but we are telling you we do not take positions on these controversial issues. You can, if you are consistent and you're principled about that, you can do that. But I think that's asking a lot of today's universities. So while I think that, I'd like to think if I were a university president, I would say, wow, this is really not what we're here for. I'm not interested in your political debate. We're trying to educate people here. I think it would be tough. And I think actually requiring it is, I'm not 100% sure whether or not that's constitutional. I suspect it probably is, but I don't know that it's desirable either way. If you have a university, and they say, oh, there's a racist incident here, you would say the university can't say, well, we think that's bad. They would have to say, we don't have an institutional opinion, and that's a tough lift.
Thanks, Robert. I want to bring up some more survey material. You brought up students' opinions on free speech. So according to a recent Pew study, 58% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents say that colleges and universities have a negative effect on the way things are going in the country, while just 36% say that the effect of colleges and universities is positive. Why do you think Republican voters have lost faith in higher education? And Phil, I'm going to let you take this one first.
Well, I try to blame everything on the media. So I think as we, seriously, you hear so much negative about the system. If you talk about the UNC system, I'm here to tell you, UNC system is not broken. It may be bent a little, but it's not broken. It's a great system, and for every negative I can present you today, I can present you several positives from that. Now, does that mean we rest on that? Absolutely not. We continue to work to make it better at a price that our citizens in North Carolina can afford. I really don't know the answer to that. If you're a Republican and you've had a child on a university campus and you've spent time there and the child's kind of been able to find gainful employment, I think that's a positive. I think you just read and see things that make you feel, and even I sometimes, that the university system is broken. And I'm not ready, after 3 years on the Board of Governors, I'm ready to say we need a lot of improvements, but it's not broken. So I'm hoping one of you can answer that, because I truly don't know, other than blame the media.
Robert, do you have any thoughts?
Actually, yeah, I do think I know the reason for this. So we'll see. I think the reason is that university campuses right now are seen by a lot of Republicans and conservatives as places where their views are denigrated, where students who express them, whether it's their kids or grandkids or whatever, are more likely to get in trouble. Now, both of those things are true. In the large, not all the time. None of these are absolute, but the reason I think that all of the net positives to to the university system, whether it be UNC or anything else, tend to not be outweighing that in people's minds now is when what it comes down to, I think, is there's a perception of unfairness and injustice that's going on. They're saying we are paying our tax money to this institution, and yet this institution is disrespecting our values, it's disrespecting our persons or our children, et cetera. And even if it's not their children, it doesn't take, one thing about injustice is it doesn't have to happen to that many people for people to get very upset about the system. If you think about America's history with racial injustice and things like that, it's not as though the horrible incidents, of which there were far too many, I'm not trying to run that down, it's not as though they were happening to 50% of people. It happens to a small percentage of people, but what it starts to do is say, if I'm ever that guy, people start putting themselves in that person's position. You say, what if that were me? How would I be treated? What's going to happen? And I think when a lot of Republicans and conservatives think, boy, if I were there now, I would be in so much trouble. I've actually had that experience myself talking to folks at Duke now. I was talking to one of the editors at the Chronicle, and I told him about some of the things we used to debate and talk about when I was there, which was 96 to 2000. He said, you could never do that now. That's not progress. So I think that's why you're seeing that. I think it's obvious that, to me at least, that the university systems and universities do have a net positive impact. But I think the injustice there is so obvious, and there seems to be so little appetite by many universities to address it that Republicans and conservatives are starting to throw up their hands and say, you know what, we don't need this. We actually think this is doing more damage.
So I do want to leave room for Q&A from the audience, so I'm going to end with just one question that I'll pose to both of our speakers. And I want to end on an optimistic note. We've all heard the horror stories. We've talked about some of them, the worst examples of bad behavior on campus. What do you consider some of the bright spots in higher education? And Phil, I'll turn to you first.
Thank you. I think accessibility, I think what you will see in North Carolina in coming years is the opportunity for a lot of people to access the UNC system that in the past have not been able to do that. And maybe that's through the community college system. We're talking today about the university system, but let's not play down how important the community college system is to the university system as well. And I'm not going to tell you that everybody needs to attend a four-year university. I'm going to tell you that everybody needs to do whatever they're comfortable with to reach their maximum potential. And that may be the community college, may be a trade school, and we certainly hope it's the university, or maybe a mixture of all three. But at the end of the day, we are working with the community college system at the UNC system of schools. We see success stories there. We have now what I think, because of North Carolina legislature, NC Promise, to where if you want to attend UNC Pembroke, or if you want to attend Western Carolina or Elizabeth City, you can attend for $500 a semester. That's cheap enough. That allows anyone, I think that allows accessibility for everyone in the state of North Carolina to attend a university. So I think in the world, I could name hundreds of things I see that are positive, but in the last year, that is the one thing that I really think has made and will make the biggest difference. And watch the enrollments this fall, and it will first be enacted this fall. Watch the enrollments at those three universities for $500 a semester, and I think you'll see some numbers going straight up.
Thank you. Robert, bright spots?
I was having some trouble thinking of some, but from my perspective, all I run into is the bad stuff. So, but if I had to come up with one, I actually don't think I could put it better than Phil has. I think the way that North Carolina, but I think most states have made it so that I think we're at a position now that we've got supply, if anything, maybe an oversupply in some cases, and I think we're able to meet the demand for college education. Obviously, there's a mismatch. Sometimes people, don't realize those things are out there, et cetera. But I think it is really good that now if you're in the United States and you are the sort of person who would benefit from a college education, I think there are a whole lot of different ways to make that possible. I think we could probably, if we got 100% good at matching it, we could get everybody who wanted to go to college and who would perform there into college and probably succeeding.